welcome to MMA for Life. I want to thank you for listening to today's show. And before we get started, I just want to remind you that I now have a Twitter account that's at MMA for Life 5. I've been having lots of conversations on there. It's actually where I came up with today's show. And I also want to remind you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's MMA for Life. Also, subscribe on iTunes and Google Podcasts and any other place where you listen to your podcast. Really, I'm all over the map right now. Also, just wanted to give a reason why I decided not to review Wolverine versus Walt Harris, and it's for the reason why I just gave you, that I saw this conversation going on Twitter, and I decided to change my show. Don't think anybody's going to be too heartbroken over that. So yeah, I really hope you guys enjoy the show and give me some feedback. That'd be really great. And like I said, thank you for listening. All right, guys, let's get into it. So we're looking at the greatest of all time here, and this is based off of a ranking off of Tapology.com if you're interested. Basically, I've just taken their top 20 fighters, and I'm going to discuss them and discuss whether I want them to be higher or lower, or whether they actually belong in the top 20. But yeah, this should be pretty good. And coming in at number 20, we have Amanda Nunes. And I actually think this is a perfect ranking for her. I think that number 20 is really good for her as far as that goes. She's definitely the best women's fighter of all time. Huge power in her hands. Really good at closing the distance and making sure that she keeps the fight where she wants it. The only knock she has on her is the fact that she has a couple of losses, but really those losses were earlier in her career, and once she got on her latest run, she really threw people pretty quickly. Has 2 wins over Valentina Shevchenko, win over Cyborg, Ronda, and Holly Holm. Easily the best striker in the women's division. 2-division champ, moved up to fight Cyborg, and still knocked her out. I mean, it's hard to deny her a top spot here. Definitely the top women's fighter of all time. Easily the best women's striker of all time. Has beaten multiple people, multiple knockouts. I mean, nobody really wanted her to beat Ronda in the UFC, and then she came in and did it anyway. I mean, just really dominant, really able to show that women can have some power in their hands, and that it's not all about their bodies and stuff, and that she's really just able to show that women can have just as much knockout power as men. And that's a great thing overall. And I just really enjoy watching her fight, just watching her take people down. And the wins over Valentina Shevchenko are a little controversial. A lot of people thought Valentina won those fights, but it was really close either way for that second fight. Now, that first fight, she was pretty dominant, but a lot of people are going to say that she lost that second fight. I don't really know about that, but it was close either way. But I definitely think that Amanda Nunes has found her place. She is one of the greatest of all time. Definitely deserves to be in the top 20 just for everybody she's beaten, everybody she's overtaken. And she's got an upcoming title fight coming soon too, which will just add to her legacy if she wins that. So yeah, definitely one of the greatest. Hard to deny her this top 20 spot just because of how dominant she's been, just because of how she's went through people, went through Ronda, went through Cyborg, went through Holly Holm, went through Raquel Pennington. I mean, just really, really dominant. Now, some people are going to complain that she's on a list full of men and stuff, but guys, just look at her legacy. She's easily one of the best strikers, not just only in the women's division, but also in the men's division too. So don't be complaining about that. I mean, she's just been so dominant. It's hard to deny her a spot like this. And definitely one of the best, maybe even higher, honestly. But I think this is a pretty good spot for her. Coming in at number 19, we have Frankie Edgar. Edgar is one of the toughest fighters ever. Has some really great wars over the past few years. And has some losses that lower him on the list for me, but could possibly be in the top 15. He has wins over BJ Penn, Gray Maynard, and Sean Sherk. For featherweight wins, he has wins over Uriah Faber and Chad Mendez. I mean, guys, he's just been in so many great fights, had so many great wars. I mean, beating Uriah Faber automatically puts you in a really high position for me just because of how good Faber is. I know he hasn't like won a UFC title or anything, but like if you beat Faber, that puts you near the top tier, especially during this time when he was really dominant. Top tier in two divisions, but he wasn't really the greatest in either one. He was never able to beat Mats, and he also was never able to beat Ben Henderson, which lowers him just a little bit for me, mainly because when I think the GOATs, I'm thinking like they've dominated a division or two, and they've stayed champion for plenty of time. And Frankie really hasn't. He never did in the lightweight division, and he never did in the featherweight division. He never actually became featherweight champion, which definitely lowers it for me. But the way he came back in that Gray Maynard fight was really, really great. And the way he beat BJ Penn multiple times was awesome too. And he's just one of those guys that's really fun to watch, really fun to see his footwork and really just watch his hands go. And he's just been in a lot of wars. That's all. That's what I can really say about it, is that they were just wars. I mean, it's really crazy to think how long he's actually lasted, especially considering how many times he's gotten dropped, how many times he's gotten beat up. And he's starting to pay for that now, especially after the Korean Zombie fight and Brian Ortega fight. But honestly, he really probably does deserve to be in the top 15 just because of how many people he's beaten, how many people he's gone the distance with. And even in those fights that he's lost, a lot of them were really, really close. And he's just a really great fighter, and overall great footwork and great hand speed, and really just great overall, but just doesn't make the GOAT list mainly because of his losses. But like I said, they were all pretty close except for these later fights. But yeah, hard to deny him a top 15 spot in my opinion. And he will go in the UFC Hall of Fame just because of his title shot, but he's done more than that too. He didn't retire after not winning in the lightweight division and then moved down to the featherweight division, and he can actually make that GOAT list eventually if he really wants to, with this next division going down to 135. If he goes down to 135 and can dominate there, I mean, that would give him a win, honestly. That would give him a really good argument for him going in as one of the GOATs. But if he doesn't do that, if he goes down there and loses, I would say that he belongs to the top 15. But right now, definitely top 15. And if he wins, probably top 10. If he goes down there and wins the title or something crazy like that. But like I said, really dominant and really just one of the most entertaining fighters ever. Made some of the greatest comebacks ever after getting knocked down by Gray Maynard. Just really, really good. Really, really good is all I have to say about it. Coming in at number 18, we have Cain Velasquez, or just Cain Velasquez. This ranking seems a little bit low for me, just because of how dominant he was again. Just like Frankie Edgar. It would be a shame for him not to be in the top 15. I mean, he's definitely one of the best heavyweights ever. Definitely one of the greatest strikers and wrestlers in the heavyweight division. And injuries held him back a little bit, but he just beat so many great people in both of his runs for his two heavyweight titles. And the way he would just decimated Junior Dos Santos, it's really hard to say that he doesn't belong in the top 15. Let's look at some of his wins. Wins over Junior, that's twice, and then Brock Lesnar and Bigfoot Silva. I mean, and Bigfoot Silva had just come off the win over Fedor too. I mean, a lot of people say, well, Verdum holds him back because Verdum beat Fedor and then Verdum beat Velasquez, but Bigfoot Silva has a win over Fedor too, and then he just got beat up by Cain Velasquez. So Cain Velasquez is definitely up there for me just because of his domination. And like I said, the losses for Verdum and Francis Ngannou hold him back. He just lost to Ngannou and then retired. And then also lost to Verdum earlier in his career. And that's where the term Sea Level Kane comes from. If you ever hear anybody say, oh, Sea Level Kane would have beaten Verdum, that means if he had been at the sea level, he actually fought in Mexico for that fight against Fabricio Verdum. Ended up losing because he didn't train his cardio down in Mexico like he should have. But yeah, other than those two losses, he also lost to Junior Dos Santos, but then came back and brutalized him and also decimated Brock Lesnar. And like I said, guys, it's really hard to deny him a top 15 spot just because he was dominant for a long time. Injuries hold him back, but he was just so great. And even if you ask Daniel Cormier, he's going to say that he's the one of the best heavyweights of all time. And I would consider Cormier to even be above him. But yeah, definitely deserves a top 15 spot. Definitely deserves to be considered one of the best heavyweights of all time. With these wins over Santos, Brock Lesnar, and Bigfoot Silva, it definitely puts him as one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. Should be higher than number 18. At least 15, if not higher. But like I said, those injuries held him back, and he also got injured in the Ngannou fight, which is the reason why his career is basically over now. He also has a win over Travis Browne, which I know a lot of people aren't going to take that seriously just because of how badly Travis's career has gone now. But at the time, Travis was looking pretty good, and then Kane just came in and stomped him there too. So just for stomping everybody he's beaten and the way he's done it, the way he showed his great wrestling and great striking, he's definitely one of the greatest heavyweights, probably top 15 of all time. At number 17, we have Max Holloway. Definitely one of the best featherweights ever. Really great striking, really great footwork. Has wins over Aldo, Brian Ortega, Anthony Pettis, Jeremy Stevens, Cub Swanson. I mean, those two wins over Aldo really showed that he's top tier in the featherweight division for sure. The losses to Conor and to Poirier and to Volkanovski hurt him just a little bit, but he has wins over all these guys that were really, really good. I mean, beating Frankie Edgar like he did, and beating Anthony Pettis like he did, and many people consider Pettis to be a really, really great fighter. And then on top of that, the wins over Aldo. It's really hard to talk about stuff like this. It's the reason why I'm not fully giving my ranking. It's just because this is so subjective. I mean, Max could easily be in the top 15 because of how many people he's beaten and the way he's done it. But then again, you have to look at his losses too. And a lot of people are going to get mad at me for saying stuff like this. But whenever you look at his losses, they take down some from his wins. And I would want to put Max in the top 15. But then I look at his losses and I ask myself, does he really deserve to go in the top 15? I mean, he's beaten plenty of guys, but it's just hard to put him there whenever he has losses to Poirier, who's not even on the list, I don't think. And then he also has losses to Conor. And then Volkanovski, too. And I know Volkanovski is a great striker and everything, but it still takes away from Max. Just because whenever you're talking about the GOAT, you got to look at their losses, too. And these losses just are small blemishes on a really, really great career. I love Max. I love his striking. I love the way he moves and everything. But when you take into the context that he can't handle bigger guys like Volkanovski or Poirier, and also that knockout loss to Conor, it does take away just a little bit. But like I said, definitely one of the greatest featherweights of all time. Defended the belt multiple times. Beat Aldo twice. Cleanly, too, might I add. And I know Aldo was coming off of the losses to McGregor whenever he fought Max, but Aldo beat up Frankie Edgar really easily, and then Max just whooped him. So if you're looking at that, I mean, Aldo did come back with a win, and then Max just blew him out of the water. But yeah, like I said, one of the best featherweights of all time. probably top 15, depending on who you ask. I just say it takes away from him just a little bit, mainly because of these losses. If he can come back and really put it up against Volkanovski, really put up a good fight and uh, possibly win, then I could see him being near the top 15, maybe top 10 if he wins the title back, for sure. But like I said, one of the greatest featherweights of all time, and love Max Holloway for sure. Love him quite a bit, just of how dominant he was and how great his fighting style is. Coming in at number 16, we have BJ Penn, who is one of the greatest lightweights of all time. 2-division champion, won the belt from Matt Hughes in the welterweight division. Great striking and great jiu-jitsu. Like I said, wins over Matt Hughes, Jens Pulver, Joe Stevenson, Kenny Florian, Diego Sanchez. But his later losses take away from his legacy. I'll get into that in a minute. Just has really great boxing and really great explosiveness in his early fights for sure. But those losses to Diaz, Frankie Edgar, Rory McDonald, Clay Guida, and Yair Rodriguez, and then Ryan Hall too in there, they just take away from his career quite a bit, especially now that we're looking at his losses outside of the cage too, because he's had personal problems and then also gotten into bar fights and stuff. It definitely takes away from your legacy when you do stuff like that. And for that reason, I would not put him above Max Holloway in this list like they have it. I understand he was a 2-division champion, but when you look at how dominant Max was compared to how dominant BJ Penn was, I mean, BJ didn't win several fights in a row like Max did. BJ has lots of personal problems, and Max is a great family man. I know that doesn't really take into context into it, but it just goes to show that the things you do later in life can detract from things you've done earlier. And BJ has certainly done a great job of trying to take away from his legacy. And these losses to Diaz, Edgar, and McDonald aren't bad, but it's the later losses that come into it too. And if he had stopped at Diaz and then Edgar again, I could probably put him above Max. But just because he kept fighting and kept losing and wouldn't call it quits, I can't put him above Max Holloway. Just because Max is one of the greatest featherweights of all time and has had more dominant wins than BJ Penn. I know BJ looked really, really impressive, but Max has just beaten guys that BJ would have never been able to beat, and also held that long win streak. And BJ never really was able to come up with a dominant win streak like he should have. He's won like 3 in a row, but then would lose one or something else would happen. Like I said, one of the best just because of the fact that he won the belt in 2 divisions. But then if you later look, he also lost those belts in convincing fashion. Lost to Matt Hughes, but also has 2 wins over Matt Hughes. But when you really look at it, it's just hard for me to put him above Max Holloway. Should be top 15, but just looking at the way he's kind of tried to tarnish his legacy, it's very divisive. And it's, like I said, it's the reason why I'm not going to rank these top 10 through top 15. I'm probably only going to rate the top 5 because of it. I'll give my ranking at the end. But yeah, like I said, BJ had really, really great boxing, but in the end, it was his cardio and his willingness to keep going, even though it was time to call it quits, just kind of tarnished his legacy. For sure, one of the greatest lightweights of all time, but his career just doesn't hold up as well as some of the others, like Max or Khabib or guys like that, because of his losses and because of his things outside of the cage. But still, one of the greatest lightweights of all time. I don't think anybody's going to deny that. And I do love BJ Penn, and I've followed his career for a long time. Don't think I'm trying to just hate on him, but I'm trying to produce the facts to show why I think these things. It's easy to see that he's had more losses than Max and hasn't been as dominant people as Max too. Same thing with him and Khabib. But like I said, I do love BJ, and I'm glad he is out of the UFC. I think it'll be good for him. He needs to get his life back on track, and I hope he does. And one of the great legends, definitely a pioneer of the sport. Next, we have the legend Dan Henderson. Dan is a two-time Pride FC champion. He also has wins over Vanderlei, Fedor, Shogun, and Vitor, and has one of the best right hands in the game. Now, I think this is just a little bit high for him, just because of the fact that Pride competition wasn't great, and when he won the welterweight title, competition wasn't really as good as it is in the UFC now. I mean, I went back and looked at the list, and those guys that he beat, I mean, I don't know any of them, and I doubt they have great records. I mean, they might, but I would have to look into that more. But when I looked at it, none of those guys seemed very impressive. He does have the win over Vanderlei, which helps him a lot. But when you look at the people he's beaten, they're not as good as some of the people that other people have beaten. And he does have a UFC tournament win, which doesn't necessarily count as a title, but it's as close as you can get without getting the title. But he was never able to step it up in the UFC and win the title. Like I said, one of the greatest right hands in the game, just ask Michael Bisping. If you go watch the first Michael Bisping fight, you'll find out real quick that Hendo is a bad dude. But I just can't put him as high as they did here for reasons I said before. And his losses to Anderson and Rampage and Vitor later in his career, and also Michael Bisping in the second fight, they take away from that. And mainly because he wasn't able to win an actual title, I don't consider him as high as they do here. Like I said, I respect Henderson. I respect his right hand. I respect everything that he's done for the sport. I respect the fact that he is one of the people to. I respect that he's one of the few people to win 2 titles in MMA. I respect that he knocked out Vanderlei, but at that point in time, Vanderlei had already been through so many wars. He had already got knocked out by Cro Cop. I mean, it just seems like Hendo was never able to take that next step to win a title in the UFC, and that detracts from him for sure. And because he wasn't able to do that, I just can't in good conscience put him in the top 15. I would say maybe number 18, 17, somewhere in there. Definitely top 20, just because of his knockout power and his wrestling abilities and stuff like that. But like I said, wasn't able to beat the top people in the UFC. Once he came over from Pride, you can go back and look at it. He lost to Anderson and then lost to Rampage, and it just goes to show that the competition in Pride wasn't as good as it is in the UFC. And yeah, that shows that Henderson is one of the best, but maybe not as high as they have here. Next, coming in at number 14 is Stipe Miocic, or Stone Cold Stipe, for those of you who watch Tommy Tuchel. I think this is really low. I would put him at the top 10. Now, a lot of people are going to disagree with me on that, but he is one of the best heavyweight strikers ever. Really good resume when you look at it. 2-time UFC champion, defended the belt the record amount of times, and defied the odds multiple times when you go and look at it. And avenged 2 of the 3 losses that he's had, and has wins over Andrei Arlovski, Fabricio Verdum, Junior Dos Santos, Francis Ngannou, and Daniel Cormier. When you take that into account and you see that he avenged his losses over Junior Dos Santos and Daniel Cormier, it's hard for me not to put him near the top 10, just for the fact that he's knocked out so many people, and he has the most title defenses. And when you defend your title the most, that makes it seem like you're one of the best champions ever. And for me, it definitely seems like that here. Just looking at his resume, I mean, he's beaten Verdum and Cormier and Ngannou, who many people would say is one of the most dominant fighters in the world right now. And go back and watch that fight. He smoked him. 100% smoked. Especially considering things right now, how Ngannou is probably going to fight him again. Now, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But Stipe really showed that he was a lot more prepared than Ngannou and was able to take on the pressure from him. And then ended up winning through his wrestling, which most people thought he wouldn't. Same thing with the DC fight. The second one, at least. Now, the first one, he got knocked out. But in the second one, he was able to hang in the onslaught and then come in at the end and hit him with 13 liver shots in a row. And if you've taken one liver shot, you know how bad that hurts. And he hit him with 13 liver shots and was able to come back and beat him. A lot of people counted him out for both these fights. And he defied the odds, which is the reason why I consider him in the top 10 because of his title defenses and because of the way he's won and the way he's knocked people out. Like I said, a lot of people are going to disagree with me saying, oh, that's too high. Stipe is a good fighter, but hasn't beaten the best. And I know he never beat Kane, but he did beat Junior Dos Santos just as bad as Kane did, knocked him out, and then also beat Cormier, who is one of the greatest too. So when you take all that into consideration, I think it's easy for me to put Stipe in the top 10. Probably not top 5, but definitely top 10 for sure. And number 13, we have Dominick Cruz. This also seems a little bit low for me, mainly just because of how big his win streak was and how good of a fighter he is. He's got great footwork and great hand speed and great wrestling, just an all-around great fighter. And when you look at his wins over Joe Benavidez, Demetrius Johnson, Uriah Faber, TJ Dillashaw, it's hard not to call him one of the top 10 of all time, especially because he's only had a couple losses. He had the loss to Uriah Faber early in his career, but then came back and stomped him twice, and then also had the loss to Cody Garbrandt and to Henry Cejudo. But you got to take a look at his career a little bit more to know the true story. I mean, he had been laid off a long time before both of those fights, and also had injuries before the TJ fight, and then still came back and beat TJ and gave Garbrandt a decent fight. But like I said, after he tore his ACL so many times and after he tore his groin and hurt himself multiple times, it's crazy to think that he came back 2 or 3 times and did fairly well each time, did really well in the Dillashaw fight. But considering how long of a layoff he had in each of these fights and just how dominant he was for a long time, beating Demetrius Johnson, who many people will put in the top 5, and also beating Uriah Faber, like I said, who's no slouch himself, and then coming back and beating TJ Dillashaw, who a lot of people consider one of the greatest bantamweights of all time. And I know his legacy is tarnished now because of the EPO that he used against Henry Cejudo, but the fact is that Dom beat him, and even if he was using EPO at the time, Dom still beat him. And I know it was a split decision, but I mean, it was a pretty great performance by Dom there. And when you take all that into consideration, the fact that he's had the long layoffs, he's had the injuries, he's had many things to overcome, and yet he was still able to be one of the top bantamweights of all time, it's hard for me not to put him near the top 10, if not in the top 10, maybe on the cusp of it, just because there's so many great fighters. That's the problem with lists like this, is that you're looking at so many people in so many different divisions. It's hard to compare them all. And Cruz might not have defended his belt as much as some people, but when you take into the consideration of his footwork, of his striking, of his wrestling, he really just seems like one of the greatest of all time, and definitely one of the greatest minds in MMA of all time when you listen to his commentary. And I know I hated on him a little bit during the Cejudo fight for calling out the ref and stuff, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Cruz is one of the best fighters, one of the best bantamweights, if not the best bantamweight of all time, and just has really dominant wins and one of the best minds in the game. And it's hard to deny him a top 10 spot, which is the reason why I would probably put him near number 10, if maybe 11 or 12, but 13 just seems a little bit low for me. But like I said, this isn't my list. I'm just looking at it to try to gauge where I see the GOATs at. And I would put him near the top 10. Coming in at number 12, we have Conor McGregor. Now, a lot of people are going to say that this needs to be higher or it needs to be lower, but I feel like this is just about right for him. I'm kind of deciding whether I feel like he's top 10 material or not. If he was, I would put him like maybe at number 10. But this feels about right. It's just hard not to put him in the top 10 because of the legacy that he's had. I mean, he's brought so many people into the sport. He's gotten so many people to watch the sport that would never have watched it if he hadn't been on. And his trash talk is amazing. His left hand is beautiful. The only thing hurting him is his losses to Diaz and to Khabib Nurmagomedov, who we'll get into later, of course. But yeah, he's just got a major knockout power. I mean, his wins are just pretty incredible when you go back and look at it. Now, a lot of these guys that fought him at an early point in their career, but Conor was just there at the right time that he was able to dominate and win 2 titles, which is something that not many people can say. And he did it. He won them both at the same time. Strong wins over Poirier, Aldo, Holloway, Eddie Alvarez, many others. Yeah, wins over Holloway, Dustin Poirier, Chad Mendes, Jose Aldo, Nate Diaz, Eddie Alvarez, Donald Cerrone. I mean, these guys aren't chumps. These guys are good fighters. And he just kind of went out there and tooled them. Especially the Aldo fight. I know he got into Aldo's head quite a bit, but he was still able to go out there and hit him with one punch and knock him out in 15 seconds. I mean, how many people can say that they've done that? But he also has the losses to Khabib and Diaz, which take away a decent amount because before that he wasn't really able to fight many wrestlers who would have challenged him. And I feel like the UFC kind of did that on purpose. But when you look at the Chad Mendes fight, many people are going to say, see, he fought a wrestler, but Chad Mendes took the fight on short notice. And that makes quite a bit of difference when you're fighting guys like Conor. And he wore himself out too quickly. But if you notice, Conor was losing the Chad Mendes fight and was able to come back and win. But I feel like if Chad hadn't been on short notice, I feel like he would have won that fight pretty convincingly. Especially when you look at the Khabib fight and the Nate Diaz fight. He wasn't able to wrestle with Nate Diaz or Khabib. Now, Khabib's different, but I mean, Diaz isn't necessarily known for his wrestling. It's underrated. But Diaz was out there just tooling him. And even in the second fight, he got taken down by Diaz multiple times. And Diaz, like I said, just isn't known for his wrestling and was able just to throw him down. Now, Conor has gotten better, but the fact is that he hasn't faced many wrestlers, and I think when we see him face more wrestlers like he's planning to, like they say he's going to fight Kamaru Usman, and when we see him fight guys like that, he is not going to be able to stuff these takedowns. He's going to get taken down over and over. And when you look at that, it's hard to put somebody like that in the top 10 who hasn't faced as many wrestlers as he should have, and has these losses to Diaz and Nurmagomedov. But then you also have to take into account the fact that he never defended either of his titles against top people. We never got to see him fight Holloway again, who he probably should have fought. We never got to see him fight Aldo again. We never got to see him fight Eddie Alvarez again. We never saw him defend the lightweight title. I think he probably could have lost to Tony Ferguson. He planned his career out really well where he wasn't able to fight and defend his title, and he was running away from people. But I also have to put him near the top because of the fact that he fought Floyd Mayweather in the boxing match, of course, and put so many people in the sport. So for that, it makes me want to put him at number 10 because he drew so many people into the sport. but then it also makes me want to take him down a notch because of his losses and running away from people, not defending his title, and also the stuff outside of the cage that's happened with him throwing freaking dollies through buses and crap. But it's hard not to put him near the top 10 because of his legacy, but it's also hard to put him there because of the fact that he ran away from people, doesn't have great wrestling, doesn't have great jiu-jitsu, but his power left hand, his ability to finish people quickly made him a popular fighter and brought a lot of people into the sport, and he has some of the greatest trash talking ever in MMA. And it's such a hard topic to talk about, mainly because of everything is so subjective like this. And many people are going to complain about me putting him at number 10, and many people are going to complain that he's not closer to the top. But I feel like 10, 11, 12, somewhere in there is a really good spot for him. Coming in at number 11, we have Matt Hughes. Gotta say, Matt Hughes definitely is one of the pioneers of the sport, and obviously one of the greats. However, I would put him somewhere between 11 and 15. 11's okay, but I'm edging towards a little bit lower just because of some of his losses and the fact that the people he beat later came back and beat him. Like, for example, GSP and BJ Penn both came back, and then he also has lost to Josh Koscheck. And when you look at the losses like that, it kind of makes me want to put him a little bit lower just because BJ and them beat him. And then also his striking has always been crap. But that's kind of besides the point. I mean, everybody knows that he's not the best striker, but really great wrestler, though. Obviously, one of the greatest wrestlers in UFC history. Especially when you look at his wins over Frank Trigg and Matt Serra. I mean, he really dominated those fights with his wrestling. Also, who could ever forget the slam over Carlos Newton? I mean, just slammed him down. And then a lot of people were saying, oh, he really didn't win the fight because he was out, and then came back and beat him again in no controversy at all and dominated the fight. And also, when you look at his wins over Frank Trigg, GSP, BJ Penn, Matt Serra, and then you look at his losses to GSP, BJ Penn, and Josh Koscheck, it evens out a bit, but like I said, his striking wasn't great, and he lost to BJ Penn whenever Penn was near the end of his career too. I realized Hughes had taken a lot by that time too, but yeah, it just puts him a little bit lower for me. Obviously one of the greatest welterweights of all time, really dominant wrestler, really great performances, great feud against Frank Trigg, one of the earliest feuds at the UFC that got a lot of attention. For sure, one of the greatest submission specialists too, and really underrated ground and pound. I mean, go back and look at a lot of those fights. I mean, he used his ground and pound to his advantage, and just dominant for a long time. But I think a lot of his legacy gets overtaken by GSP because of how much more dominant GSP was. But I would put Hughes in the top 15 because of his great grappling and just everything he's done for the sport and all the wins he's had. But not enough to put him near the top 10 because of the losses and because he doesn't have the same legacy as GSP. But like I said, still a great fighter. Love Matt Hughes. Sad whenever he was in the train accident. But all the respect to him, but can't put him in the top 10 for those reasons. Coming in at number 10, we have Randy the Natural Couture, one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, creator of the infamous Dirty Boxing, or at least made it popular, and 5-time UFC champion, American hero, really. I mean, people call him Captain America, for God's sake. Who doesn't know about Randy Couture if you've watched any MMA at all? And has one of the greatest careers ever in MMA. And for me, I go somewhere in between him barely making the top 10, and then some days I just want to throw him right in the top 5 and say, yep, he's one of the greatest. But he has a long and storied career. fought some of the best fighters ever and also trained some of the best fighters ever. He has wins over Vitor Belfort, Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, Pedro Hizo, Tim Sylvia, and Mark Coleman. Plenty of losses, though, to Chuck, Big Nog, Brock Lesnar, and Josh Barnett. But what makes him so special is that he started later in life. He started whenever he was in his 30s and then made it all the way up till 45. And honestly, I still wouldn't want to meet him in the street somewhere today. I mean, the dude had a freaking heart attack not too long ago and walked himself to the hospital. I mean, this guy's nuts. But the losses to Chuck and Brock Lesnar and guys like that hold him back. And he also has some weird losses earlier in his career too. But compared to his wins, they don't mean that much to me. Because, like I said, he lost to Brock whenever he was 40. So, I mean, when you take that into account, and also the fact that he has one of the greatest comebacks of all time by beating Tim Sylvia, not just beating Tim Sylvia, but dominating Tim Sylvia, hitting him with leg kicks and punches and taking him down multiple times and sitting on top of him for 5 rounds when most people didn't give him a chance in that fight. I mean, Sylvia was good at the time, but he wasn't great compared to a lot of the champions we've had. But still, you can't deny that it's impressive that Randy was able to come back and whoop him like he did. And then also beating Mark Coleman in the latter of his career, even though that wasn't like the best Mark Coleman we'd ever seen. I mean, it's still Mark Coleman. Mark Coleman had just beaten Stephan Bonnar too, and then Randy showed that he was the better fighter. And also beating Tito too. I mean, go back and watch that fight with Tito. He was able to take him down and beat him up. And then same with the first fight with Chuck Liddell, was able to take him down and ground and pound for the win. I mean, that's some pretty dominant fighting right there. And also one of the pioneers, again, like many others in the list, fought really early in the UFC. And that's part of the reason why he left at one point, but then came back. It's also noteworthy the fact that he's a natural light heavyweight and yet was still able to go up to heavyweight and dominate all these people. Like, a lot of people don't understand how much weight actually factors into it. But I mean, Sylvia was a lot heavier than him. And many of these guys were a lot heavier than him. And he was still able to go up there and beat plenty of guys and win the belt multiple times. I would consider him one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. Some people would probably disagree with me there. But because of how he won and how many people he's trained and how many times he's gotten title shots or been in title shots, I would say one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. And this is a pretty good spot for him. I would actually put him ahead of Chuck Liddell, who's actually next on the list, but we'll get into that more. Just because of his longevity and the way he started it and the way he ended his career. I know he has the loss to Machida there at the end, which was a brutal KO. But like I said, it's still really impressive because Randy was in his 40s and was able to hang with a lot of these guys. The loss to Machida was one of the worst knockouts I've ever seen, but at least he went out on his back and was still able to hold on to his legacy, unlike many people in this list. He definitely belongs in the top 10, but part of me wants to put him around 8 or 7. I mean, like I said, it just depends on the day for me. Sometimes I want to put him at 5. Sometimes I want to put him at the latter end of 10 because his record isn't that great. But I think this is pretty close for him. But like I said, I would just put him ahead of Chuck just a little bit. And that's what we're going to get into now. Number 9, Chuck Liddell, everybody. Now, everybody knows who Chuck Liddell is. But with the losses at the end of his career and the way he lost to Tito, it's hard for me to put him up against Randy. But I don't want to give him any disrespect, okay? I still consider Chuck Liddell one of the greatest of all time. As many of you know, Chuck Liddell is the reason why I got into MMA. I watched this fight with Wanderlei Silva, which was actually after he had his historic title reign. And he also has many big wins. Wins over Randy, Tito Ortiz, Wanderlei Silva, Vitor Belfort, Alistair Overeem, and Kevin Randleman. I mean, these are big wins, guys. But the losses to Rampage, Keith Jardine, Rashad Evans, Shogun, and Rich Franklin, and then eventually Tito there at the end, it's hard for me to put him ahead of Couture because Couture was able to come back in his 40s and still win the title, whereas Chuck was never able to come back after that Rampage loss, really. I know he had the win over Vanderlei, but I mean, losing to Keith Jardine like that, that's that shouldn't have happened. And I know it was a split decision loss, but the fact is that Jardine shouldn't have been able to handle his power. Chuck was starting to lose it right after the Rampage loss, and also losing to Rampage earlier in his career too. And when you take all that into consideration, I would put Chuck maybe at number 9, but I would put Randy Couture ahead of him because Randy was able to last longer, win more titles. Chuck might have defended the title more, but I think Randy has had the better wins. Maybe I'm not sure. It's pretty close either way. I would just give the edge to Randy because of his longevity. But like I said, Chuck has had some really great wins, a really amazing career. One of the best brawlers in the UFC ever. I mean, he wasn't afraid to come in and throw down, and I really respect that. But it also led to the end of his career. It also led to him losing his chin, and once that happened, he wasn't able to fight like he wanted, and still decided that he wanted to run in and not keep his hands up and stuff. And you just can't do that whenever you're fighting like he was with a chin that it was made out of glass, and that eventually led to him losing to Tito and losing to Shogun and guys like that who probably in his prime he could have beaten, but still one of the greatest. Still has a legacy that will never be forgotten, and brought many people into the MMA world. And his 2 wins over Tito and his wins over Randy Couture are still some of the best of all time, and still some that I will never forget. And it's for that reason I still put him in the top 10. But it's also for those reasons that I can't justifyingly put him ahead of Randy Couture, even though he beat Randy twice. But if you put Chuck from right after he lost to Rashad versus the Randy who had just beaten Tim Sylvia, because that was around the same time, I think. I think you would see a lot different outcome than what you did before. That's just my opinion, though. A lot of people are going to disagree with me on that, and honestly, I don't really care. But the fact is that Randy had a longer longevity and won more titles than Chuck, which is the reason why I put him ahead of Chuck. But like I said, respect to both guys. Respect to Chuck for his power. Respect to Chuck for everything he's done for the sport. And just a really great career for him. But it is tainted with some of the losses, especially that last loss to Tito. And I can't believe I actually had to say that he freaking lost to Tito. But still, one of the greatest. Ask anybody on the street who has ever watched MMA, and I guarantee you they know who Chuck Liddell is. Next, we look at Jose Aldo, who is a great fighter with good striking and leg kicks and lots of dominant wins. He's a WEC champion, a former UFC champion, one of the greatest featherweights of all time. But coming in at number 8 seems a little high for him, mainly because of his losses to McGregor and to Volkanovski and to Holloway. But maybe not because of how dominant he was. I mean, he has wins over Chad Mendez, Ricardo Lamas, Kenny Florian, Uriah Faber, Mike Brown, Cub Swanson, Korean Zombie, Frank Yeager, and Renato Moicano. So when you take that into consideration, I'm more wanting to put him near the just below the top 10. And I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me. They're going to be like, well, you put Dominic Cruz higher, but you don't want to put Jose Aldo higher. And that's because I feel like Cruz has beaten more highly ranked people, and I also feel like Aldo has harder losses than Cruz has had. Aldo got knocked out by McGregor in 15 seconds, and also got knocked out by Max Holloway both times. I mean, he lost in brutal fashion, which hasn't really happened to Dominic Cruz. And Cruz has had better comebacks and stuff, whereas Aldo hasn't really been able to regain the traction that he had as the champion. And if he was able to come back and win the bantamweight title or be more highly ranked in bantamweight, I would be more willing to put him near the top 10. But until he does that, I can't do it, especially because they have him higher than Randy Couture and Chuck Liddell. I just don't think he has the wins that they've had. And like I said, I don't want to give any disrespect to anybody here. And I do respect Aldo. I do respect everything that he's done for the sport. I do respect how good of a fighter he actually is. But I'm saying that his resume doesn't hold up as well as some of the others, especially considering Chuck and them have wins over former champions and stuff. And I guess Aldo does too, but it just doesn't seem as impressive to me. He has lots of finishes, but the knockout losses and stuff hurt him quite a bit for me. I'm a little lenient because of everything that's happened and the way he's lost and stuff like that. And I don't know if he'll ever get back to where he was before, or if he'll ever be able to be as dominant as he was again. And if he is, then I could see him being in the top 10. But until he does that, I just can't see it. But he is one of the best featherweights of all time. He is one of the most dominant champions the WEC or UFC has ever had. And I respect him quite a bit. Just can't see him being this high. But he does have lots of dominant wins. And it could be close. I'm not going to say that I would never put him in the top 10. I'm just saying, for me right now, I just can't see it. But I do respect him quite a bit. And I respect the fact that many people do put him in the top 10. I just don't see it. I just don't see him being better than some of these other guys like Dom or Henry Cejudo, who they don't even have on the list, but we'll get into that later. I just can't see him being higher than these guys, but that's just me. Coming in at number 7, we have Khabib Nurmagomedov. And I think this is too low for me, guys. I mean, I would put Khabib in the top 5 for sure, just because of how dominant he's been. Injuries have held him back some, but he's one of the greatest ever. He has wins over Rafael dos Anjos, Michael Johnson, Edson Barbosa, Al Iaquinta, Conor McGregor, and Dustin Poirier. One of the best wrestlers in MMA ever. And also, perfect record. Hasn't had any losses. And that's going to be my biggest argument for putting him in the top 5. In my personal top 5 for sure. Is that he has not had a blemish. He has not had any person overtake him. And that's the biggest difference between him and most of these guys. And if he wins over Justin Gaethje or Tony Ferguson, if Tony ever comes back, then that will definitely put him at number 1 for me. Because he hasn't lost. He's dominated everybody that he's fought. I know there was an earlier fight that many people say that he lost, but I don't think that really tarnishes his legacy that much as people are saying. And having this undefeated record just proves that he's a bad dude. And him beating Conor, and him beating Edson Barbosa, and him beating Michael Johnson. I mean, these guys are good fighters. They're good strikers. And I wish he could fight GSP, because that would really truly show that he is the greatest of all time. But it's hard not to deny him a top 5 spot right now based off of the fact that he's the most dominant fighter we've ever seen. He just mauls people and wrestles people to death and puts them up against the cage, and they never get up. And that's such dominance when you compare it to other fighters that have these losses and stuff, and he doesn't. The only thing holding him back is the fact that he's injured, that he's been injured many, many times, and he's had to pull out of fights, and it cost him some money more than anything, not necessarily his legacy. Because if he had fought those times, I think he would have won. I don't see him losing those fights that he was scheduled to fight, especially against Tony Ferguson. I don't think he would lose against Tony. There's a chance he would, but like I said, he's just so dominant, and those injuries, they do hold him back just a little bit. I feel like if he had won all those fights that he was scheduled to fight, then he probably would be number one right now. But taking into the fact that he's undefeated, taking into the fact that he's beaten multiple fighters who have wins over champions and stuff, and just how he's beaten them, how he's been dominating people with his wrestling, and then beat up Al Iaquinta on the feet, who's no slouch himself, and even knocked down Conor with a punch. I mean, not many people have done that. And many people consider Conor to be one of the best. And then Khabib just goes out there and knocks him down and stuff. I mean, how can you deny Khabib a top 5 spot, taking all that into consideration, taking all the things that he's done, taking all the people he's beaten? It's not something I can do. I have to put him in the top 5. This is too low. He's so dominant, so fierce. He's fought a freaking bear, for God's sake. Get that man a top 5 spot, and possibly the number 1 spot if he ever can come in and beat guys like Justin and Tony. Coming in at number 6, we have DC, Daniel Cormier. This is another one that I think is a little bit too low for me, guys. At first, I wasn't sure about it, but after looking at all his wins and everything, I've got to put him in the top 5 for sure. I mean, he's one of the greatest light heavyweights and heavyweights ever, and not many people can say that. He has wins over Bigfoot Silva, Josh Barnett, Frank Mir, Roy Nelson, Dan Henderson, Anthony Johnson, Alexander Gustafsson, Derek Lewis, and Stipe. He practically took over 2 divisions. The losses to Jones and Stipe hold him back, but looking at the names here, it's hard not to put him in the top 5. Those list of names are former champions. Those list of names have huge wins, and he dominated all of them. And I know the Stipe fights are a little controversial because in the first one, he was poking Stipe in the eyes, and then in the second one, he was winning, but then Stipe came back and hit him with all those liver shots and stuff. But just the fact that he's beaten so many guys, and the fact that the only person to ever hold him back was Jon Jones. And Jon Jones was on steroids for one of those times. And also, he won a round against Jones, which is pretty hard to do. And I know that he's probably never going to fight Jones again, which will always haunt him in a way. But I don't think we need to look at that. I think we need to look at the guys that he's beaten. And when you do, Frank Mir and Dan Henderson and all these guys, they were all so great. And Cormier just kind of tooled them. I mean, Anderson Silva. He tooled Anderson Silva really easily. Now, I have Anderson above him, but just the fact that he did do it, and the fact that he was able to wrestle all these guys, and the fact that he has such great wrestling abilities, and even good hand speed, too. I mean, he's just one of the best ever. And I just can't deny the fact that he's beaten all these guys and took over 2 divisions. Now, many people might not consider him the best in either one, but there's a case to be made for heavyweight. Like, it's still 1-1 with Stipe. If he beats Stipe, in my opinion, he is the greatest heavyweight of all time. If he beats Stipe again. If he doesn't, then that can be, that can bring him down a little bit. But for right now, he's in the top 5 for me. His dominant wins, the way he took over 2 divisions, the way he held his own up against Jones there for a while. In both fights, really. I'm not saying he was going to win or anything, or that he would ever beat Jon Jones, but I'm just saying that he held his own, and that's quite a bit, especially considering not many people have been able to do that. And just the way he brutally knocked out Stipe, and the way he was able to submit Derek Lewis, who many people like. I mean, I can't deny him a top 5 spot. Some people might, because they would say these wins were past people's primes and stuff. But when you look at the names and you look at the way he dominated all of them, I'd say he's a top 5 fighter for sure. One of the greatest of all time. One of the best heavyweights and light heavyweights. And he's beaten some really great people in dominant fashion. DC is a legend and always will be, in my opinion. And just because he lost to Jon Jones doesn't necessarily mean that he's not one of the best. And especially considering John Jones was on steroids quite a bit and all the controversy with that, which we'll get into that more later. I just think that Cormier is great, and he's a great person, great fighter, great dad, and an overall wonderful person. I respect him so much. I'm grateful for everything that he did in the sport. And I used to not like him, but I can't deny that he's one of the best with these names that he's beaten. All right, guys, we're at the top 5. And coming in at number 5 is Fedor Emelianenko. This name is very infamous in MMA world because Fedor has been long considered to be one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. And I agree that he's one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, but there's a little more to the story than what people like to say. So let's take a look at it. Fedor has wins over Heath Herring, Gary Goodrich, Big Nog, Mark Coleman, Kevin Randleman, Cro Cop, Tim Sylvia, Andrei Arlovsky, Frank Mir, Chael Sonnen, Rampage, and plenty of others. Now, when you look at that list, you might say, oh, well, obviously he's one of the greatest. I mean, he's beaten plenty of people. He's beaten all these guys. But when you look at it more, for me, I started to realize that a lot of Fedor's record was padded. Pride didn't like to have their champions defend the title a lot. And Fedor was no different. He didn't defend the title that much, and he also didn't fight that many top contenders for a long time. Many of these people that he fought were past their prime, like Kevin Randleman was past his prime, in my opinion, at this point. And many of them also didn't have that many great of wins. Like Gary Goodrich was, on the downhill of his career. And Big Nog is a good win. Mark Coleman was also on the downhill of his career. He had already passed the time whenever he won the UFC title. Andrei Arlovsky, he had just gotten released by the UFC, and same thing for Tim Sylvia. Sylvia had just lost to Randy Couture. Every time Fedor fought somebody, or most of the time when Fedor fought somebody, it was past their time. It was past when they were dominant. Same thing for Rampage. Same thing for Chael. Cro Cop was pretty good at the time, one of the best at the time, but few of these people that he fought were at the top of their game. And that brings it down quite a bit for me because he wasn't fighting a lot of the top people at the time. A lot of the top people were at the UFC, and Pride was throwing him these people so it would pad his record, and they did a good job at it because everybody considers Fedor to be the greatest of all time, and I just don't. I can't see it that way. I can't see him being the greatest whenever a lot of these people that he's beaten weren't really great at the time. Like, he has wins over Hong Man Choi and guys like that. Guys who had no business even being in the ring, and yet he fought them and beat them. But it's no wonder, because they didn't have any experience. I mean, I think Randy has better wins than him. I think Chuck has better wins than him. I do realize that he had quite the win streak, but he lost to Bigfoot Silva, who Cain Velasquez beat, by the way. He lost to Fabricio Verdum, who was released by the UFC, which Dana White has said that before. But also, Verdum lost to Stipe at his height, and Stipe isn't considered the greatest by many people. And I just can't see that. I just can't see that Stipe isn't better than Fedor because he defended his title more. He beat higher-ranked people, in my opinion. I do realize that Fedor beat Andrei Arlovsky, but Stipe beat Daniel Cormier. Stipe beat Junior Dos Santos. I mean, names like that are a lot better than Hong Man Choi and out-of-touch Tim Sylvia and past his prime Rampage and all these people. I mean, I do consider Fedor to be in the top 5 heavyweights, but I cannot consider him to be in the top 5 of all time because of all these fights that were just padded fights that they just wanted him to look impressive and not actually fight the highest ranked contenders. And I don't know whether that was Pride's fault or his fault or whoever's fault, but because of it, I can't consider him one of the best. I do respect him, and I do respect his legacy, but it's very padded. I hate talking about him like this, but it seems like Pride just wanted to make sure that they had their top contender and made sure that he was never going to leave, and he didn't. He stayed in the company till the very end, and it just downgrades his legacy a little bit for me. He does have dominant wins, but a lot of these people just weren't at the level as they should be, and yeah, I just don't consider him to be a part of the top 5. He should be in the top 10 probably, maybe top 8, but I can't put him in the top 5. He just hasn't faced the people that many of these other guys have, like John Jones or Anderson Silva, guys like that who have beaten the best. And to me, Fedor just didn't beat the best. That's just my opinion, though. I really love and respect Fedor, though. Just can't see him in the top 5. All right, guys, we're up to number 4, and here's another controversial decision by me. Demetrius Johnson. Yeah, guys, I think this is too high. I don't consider Demetrius Johnson to be in the top 5. I respect everything that he's done for the sport. I respect the fact that he has plenty of wins and has the longest win streak of all time. But the fact is that a lot of those guys he faced, it kind of reminded me of Fedor. He has a lot of padding. A lot of these guys aren't top contenders. Let's look at his wins. He's got wins over Miguel Torres, Ian McCall, Joseph Benavidez, John Dodson, Kyoji Horiguchi, Tim Elliott, Wilson Hayes, Ray Borg, and Henry Cejudo. Only a couple of those guys are top-level material. He lost to top-ranked fighters like Cejudo and Cruz. He didn't want to take the big fights. He refused to fight TJ Dillashaw. Stuff like that is the reason why I can't put him in the top 5. If he had fought and beaten TJ, I could see it. I could see him being in the top 5. But whenever you have wins like Ray Borg and Tim Elliott and Wilson Hayes, and then have basically beaten everybody and refuse to go up to fight better competition, I can't put you in the top 5. All the great fighters have either moved up or moved down or have found new contenders, and he never did. And it's for that reason why I respect his career, but I don't respect the fact that he didn't want harder competition or wanted more money or whatever. Whatever the case was, the fact is that he still ducked TJ. He still lost to Cejudo, who was really the only guy besides like Joseph Benavidez or that could even remotely become a champion or anything like that. I mean, nobody knows that much about Ray Borg if you ask them, like a casual MMA fan. Nobody knows how good he is because he's not. He's mid-tier. He's not a high level. Same thing for Wilson Hayes. Nobody knows who Wilson Hayes is. And that's what puts him lower for me, is the fact that he fought these lower ranked contenders that nobody really knows about, that he could have easily beaten, and he knew he could easily beat them, and that's the reason why he went down to the division. And when it was time for him to step up, he didn't. And if he had fought TJ and won or not won, it could help his legacy a little more for me. But he didn't, and he lost to Cruz, he lost to Cejudo, he didn't fight those top-ranked guys, and that puts him lower for me. Now, it's not that much lower. I'm blowing it a bit out of proportion. He's not like below the top 10. Of course, he's near the top 5. Of course, he's definitely in the top 8. But the fact is that I can't put him ahead of Daniel Cormier or probably even Henry Cejudo. And Henry Cejudo is not even on this top 20 list, which is still ridiculous. But when you look at his win record, he does have a great record. It's just very padded. But his wins over Kyoji Horiguchi and Henry Cejudo and John Dodson and Joe Benavidez, it does make him be in the top 7 or 8, close to top 5. But I just can't put him ahead of Cormier or Khabib, because Khabib is undefeated and has fought many, many high-ranked contenders, and Johnson just really fought the easy fights, for me at least. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me on that. A lot of people are going to say, oh, you're not giving Johnson enough credit. You're not saying that he fought a division that was that wasn't marketed very well. But the fact is that if these guys had been top fighters, they would have been marketed well. Dana would not refuse to market fighters who were top level. The fact is that these guys were mid-level. These guys were guys that Demetrious Johnson easily beat and knew he could easily beat them. And then when it was time for him to step up, he didn't. And that's why he's lower on the list for me. That's the reason why I can't consider him in the top 5. And I know it's going to cause a lot of stir. It already has on Twitter. I've already been arguing with people about this. But yeah, it's my opinion, guys. And I'm not going to take it back. I'm not going to say that Demetrious Johnson is in the top 5 when I don't think he is. He has great wrestling and great striking, but his losses to Cejudo, his loss to Cruz, him refusing to fight TJ just takes away from me. And I do respect him, but would have respected him a lot more if he had taken that TJ fight or had decided to fight more highly ranked contenders. That's just me, though. All right, guys, we're getting into the real GOATs now. Coming in at number 3, we have Anderson the Spider Silva. Now, I don't know anybody that denies that Silva is one of the GOATs for sure. I mean, he's one of the most dominant champions that there's ever been. And before Demetrious Johnson had the record for most title defenses and beat so many dominant people in convincing fashion. And let's take a look at some of his wins. He has wins over Chris Lieben, Rich Franklin twice, Nate Marquardt, Dan Henderson, James Irvin, Patrick Cote, Forrest Griffin, Damian Maia, Chael Sonnen, Vitor Belfort, Yushin Okami, Stephen Bonner, and Derek Brunson. Now, his losses towards the end of his career hurt him just a little bit. Lost to Michael Bisping and Daniel Cormier, Chris Weidman, Jared Cannonier. But the fact is that to me, the list of people who he's beaten outweigh those losses. And even in his loss against Israel Adesanya, he won a round in most people's book. And he was in his 40s there. And also, many people think that he won the Bisping fight. I don't know about that one. I kind of see how he lost, but it was pretty close either way, especially with that big knee that got the knockdown. There's controversy on that. But yeah, Anderson is one of the best strikers, has some of the best head movement in UFC history, if not MMA history, and beat all these people in dominant fashion. The way he beat Forrest Griffin was insane. The way he made him look like he was nothing. And a lot of people were trying to argue with me on Twitter, hey, Anderson never beat anybody good at light heavyweight. Anderson didn't dominate at light heavyweight. And maybe he didn't dominate compared to today's standards, but Griffin had just lost the title whenever he fought Anderson Silva. And then Anderson just came in and knocked him out cold. Not many people could have made the jump from middleweight to light heavyweight and came in and beat a former champion like that in their second fight at light heavyweight. And the fight against James Irvin, pretty impressive at the time, but now looking back, we obviously know that James Irvin wasn't that great of a light heavyweight. But like I said, at the time, knocking him out in a minute and a second, I mean, it was just total domination. Just knocked him out clean. And same thing with so many of these other guys, like Rich Franklin, who was considered to be the best at the time. Nate Marquardt, who was really good. Vitor. Front kick Vitor in the face. Knocked him out cold. And just used his head movement. If you watch Tommy Toehold, Anderson, he goes, whoop, whoop, whoop. Uses his head movement and gets out of the way and front kicks Vitor in the face. Really crazy knockouts. And even though he might have had some boring fights or whatever, he still dominated every single fight that he was ever in during this run. And some people are trying to say that the people he fought weren't that great, but Vitor, Chael, Yushin Okami, Damian Maia, Dan Henderson, these guys are good. These guys are some of the best of all time. And he told them all. And I just can't see how people don't understand that Anderson fought high-ranked people. And even in his later stages, whenever he fought DC, he still hit DC with a liver kick that hurt him quite a bit. And DC doesn't get hurt that often. And Anderson hurt him. He obviously lost the fight, but there was moments in there that he looked good. Moments in there that he looked like the old Anderson. And the old Anderson is considered the best ever. He's not necessarily anymore because of his losses, especially the ones with Weidman and his steroid use. But I think I'm a little more lenient on Anderson with his steroid, mainly because this was after he broke his leg and after he got hurt. And many people take steroids to heal up from that. I don't think Anderson was taking steroids before, because there were many times that he weighed in under the 185-pound limit. And steroid abusers, like, they don't do that. They look bigger. They look like chiseled and stuff. He looked skinny and not very beefed up or anything. Like, he would have had more muscle, and he didn't. He was just skinny and fast and dominant. I know that may not be the best argument ever, but I don't think he was taking steroids. I do think he's one of the best ever. I do think that he dominated plenty of people that make him go in the top 5. And for me, it's the top 3 for sure. Only behind Jones and GSP, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, truly one of the best. Truly has some of the most dominating performances ever. Some of the best knockout highlights ever. And many dominant wins. Some boring fights, but hey, I mean, everybody has them. And even in those boring fights, he was still very technical. He was still able to stop them. And up until that Weidman fight, I would have told you he was the greatest ever. And I still consider him one of the greatest ever. Coming in at number 2, we have who many consider to be the greatest of all time. And I consider him to be definitely one of the greatest of all time. But he does come with plenty of controversy, everybody. Johnny Bones Jones. He's one of the greatest wrestlers ever, and has one of the most unique striking styles ever. Depends on how much you think drugs played into his victories. That can make him rank a little bit lower. And I do think they played somewhat of a part. But the fact is that he's beaten so many people and cleaned out the light heavyweight division in a really tough era. In an era where Lyoto Machida and Shogun Rua and Rampage Jackson and Rashad Evans were all on top. And he just came in and blew them all right out of the water. He has wins over Stephan Bonnar, Ryan Bader, Shogun, Rampage, Machida, Rashad Evans, Vitor Belfort, Chael Sonnen, Alexander Gustafsson, Glover Teixeira, Daniel Cormier, OSP, and Anthony Smith. He also has wins over Dominic Reyes and Thiago Santos. Those wins were very controversial, especially the one over Dominic Reyes for me. I thought he lost that fight pretty cleanly. For sure, the first 3 rounds. Those last 2 rounds were pretty close, but I thought he lost the first 3 rounds, and I don't know how people argue against that, because he got outstruck and hit plenty of times. It's for this reason why I don't consider him the GOAT. I consider him one of the GOATs, and it's also his drug use and steroid use, and especially popping as many times as he has, and also hitting the pregnant lady and doing cocaine and bringing it all up during the Cormier fights and saying how he would snort cocaine off of hookers and stuff. It's hard to respect somebody who does stuff like that. I do respect Jones for his fighting ability, but his legacy is really tarnished, not just because of the steroids and stuff, but because after he came back and started not testing positive, he's starting to lose more and more rounds, especially in that Thiago Santos fight, and then the Dominic Reyes fight, where he was outstruck, in my opinion, in at least the Dominic Reyes fight. I don't know about the Thiago Santos fight, but it was pretty close, and Chael Sonnen had it for Thiago Santos, and many other people did too. And this just happens to be right after he comes back and is testing clean now. I don't know, man. It just seems a little odd to me. And especially when you look at the pictures of his OSP fight, like right before that, he looked really chubby in it. And again, this was after he said he was testing clean and stuff. And he didn't look that impressive in the OSP fight. I mean, obviously he won, but I mean, he didn't look like the dominant John Jones that fought Shogun Rua or anything like that. He didn't fight clean all the time. He's had 2 or 3 controversial split decisions, especially Dominic Reyes, Thiago Santos, and the first Gustafsson fight. He is a very great fighter. He has plenty of dominant wins, but I can't consider him the GOAT because of these reasons. I do respect him, and he's got some of the best elbows ever. He's got some of the most technical wrestling. Out-wrestled Cormier, and that tells you a lot, because Cormier is one of the best wrestlers we've ever seen, and he ragdolled him, and also outstruck him. And Cormier is a good striker, too. But it's the stuff outside of the cage that takes it away from John Jones. And now inside the cage, too, ever since he's been not looking as dominant against these other guys. But overall, I do think he's one of the GOATs, and I would put him in the top 3. I don't know whether I'll put him ahead of Anderson Silva, and it's pretty close for me for him to be behind Khabib, just because Khabib hasn't had a blemish. And John Jones has. John Jones has had plenty of blemishes with steroids and controversial split decisions and stuff like that. Failing drug tests. And even though Khabib has had many injuries and stuff, he's never fought for steroids. He's beaten multiple people, beaten just as good as people as John Jones has. But the only thing that holds him back is that John Jones may have faced just a little bit better competition. I mean, just a hair. He's faced more legends, which is the reason why I give it to him. But Khabib is on his way up. Khabib could be the best of all time. Khabib could overtake John Jones and GSP, who is number 1 on the list, and I'll get into that here in a little bit. But like I said, John Jones is one of the greatest ever, and nobody's going to argue that. And I think that many of those fights he could have won without the steroids and stuff. But the fact is that he took them. He's possibly lost these last couple fights, depending on who you ask. And he just has so much controversy around him. But I do respect him, and he is in the top 3, for sure. All right, guys. Coming in at number 1, the man, the myth, the legend, George Rush St. Pierre. Guys, for me, this is number 1, and it's also number 1 on the Tapology list, too. And that's for good reason. GSP is the most dominant fighter that there's ever been in MMA. He has great wrestling and has beaten plenty of good people. Frank Trigg, Sean Shirk, BJ Penn, Matt Hughes, Josh Koscheck, Matt Serra, John Fitch, Thiago Alves, Dan Hardy, Jake Shields, Carlos Condit, Nick Diaz, and Michael Bisping. These are all top-ranked fighters. They're all really good. And he dominated them. He out-wrestled them. He outstruck many of them. Knocked out Michael Bisping and put him in a rear naked choke. And 2-time champion, or 3-time champion, 3-time champion, 2 at welterweight, and 1 at middleweight. And he just has plenty of wins and dominated Matt Hughes, dominated Matt Serra, the second time at least. We'll get into the first fight. And dominated Jake Shields, who many thought would give him trouble, but didn't. Didn't dominate Carlos Condit, but had one of the greatest fights ever with him and still came out on top. Dominated John Fitch, who had overrun the welterweight division for a long time, held people down, and GSP was just able to outstrike and out-wrestle him, beat Dan Hardy, and out-wrestle Nick Diaz. I mean, these guys are legends, and he's just ragdolled most of them. Won plenty of rounds, and of course, coming back and beating Michael Bisping. Just one of the greatest comebacks ever. Many people didn't know whether he was going to win that fight or not, but he ended up coming back and doing it. And me and my dad both cheered whenever he came back and did that, because we didn't like Bisping as champion. Respect him, but didn't like him. And then just to see GSP come back and do it was great. He does have some knocks on him. The fight with Matt Serra the first time, he got knocked out. But I think he has overcame that since he beat Matt Serra the second time really cleanly. I mean, nobody was clamoring for a third fight. That's for sure. and also the Johnny Hendricks fight. Now, I hate to say that, but Johnny Hendricks was probably on steroids during that time, or he was doing something that was giving him too much of an advantage, because right after the GSP fight, his career went downhill as soon as USADA came in and proved that he could win fights with USADA. And Johnny Hendricks refused to take a drug test that GSP wanted him to right before their fight. It really makes me think that Johnny Hendricks was using steroids or something that he shouldn't have been. I do respect Johnny Hendricks, but looking at it, that fight was close either way, and especially now figuring out that he probably was on steroids and stuff, it makes me respect GSP even more that he was able to do what he did. It was a split decision. Most people don't agree with it, but looking back, I don't think it scars him that much since everything has come out about Hendricks and stuff. And for that reason, GSP is my number one. He could eventually be taken over by Khabib, just like Jones or Anderson. But the fact is that GSP has such a great legacy. I mean, defending his belt against BJ Penn, who was really dominant at the time, defended his belt against all these people, and just outclassed most of them, and learned his mistake from the Matt Serra fight and used his wrestling more, and just put on so many dominant performances, and is such a great guy. Highly ranked fighter from everybody who knows anything about MMA. Just such a great fighter, great wrestler, pretty good striker, and there's not much more to say other than that. He's just the number one ever, and UFC Hall of Famer now. Congratulations to him. And he's had one of the best careers ever, and the only way he can make his career even better is if he came back and fought Khabib and beat Khabib somehow, got the third title. But other than that, yeah, just so dominant. One of the best ever. Okay, before I give my definitive list, there's one guy I wanted to point out that's not on here, which I completely disagree with. That is Henry the Messenger Cejudo. I don't see how you can't put Cejudo in the top 10 now. He's beaten TJ Dillashaw, Dominic Cruz, and Marlon Moraes, and also Demetrius Johnson. I mean, those are top-level guys there. He's a two-time champion, defended both belts, did more than Conor actually did. I mean, I can't see this guy not going in the top 10. It's a shame that Tapology didn't. I know the way they rank their fighters, they update it each time, so it's been updated since he's won the title, and they still had him like around 22 or something. That's ridiculous. He belongs in the top 10. I'm going to give my top 5 now, but I just wanted to mention that before we get into my official ranking. I'm not going to rank the top 10 or the top 15 or the top 20. There's just so many in-betweens there that I can't fully decide who I really want to go in that list, but I do have a top 5, and I'm going to give it now, but hopefully it won't be too controversial, especially that I've gone through each individual person in the top 20. So coming in at number 5 for me, I'm going to have to say Daniel Cormier, for the reasons I've stated. Wins over lots of guys, more dominant people than Fedor, in my opinion. The loss to Jones hurts him just a little bit, but not enough to soil his reputation. Coming in at number 4 is Khabib Nurmagomedov, and that's for also reasons I've stated. He's undefeated, dominant, one of the best wrestlers ever. Knocked down McGregor, beat McGregor, beat Edson Barboza, beat all these guys, and truly one of the best lightweights ever, if not the best ever, and such a dominant champion, and I think he'll continue to grow his legacy even more. Coming in at number 3, I'm going to put Anderson Silva. I would put him ahead of Jones, but he does have steroid controversy and stuff, but he truly is one of the best ever. One of the greatest strikers of all time. Has really great head movement. Hate that his career has ended the way it has, but there's talks with him fighting Conor now, so we'll just have to see where it goes. But yeah, definitely top 3. Number 3 for him. And then I'm going to have it at number 2 at John Jones, and I just went over that. And number one, GSP. Again, went over that just because of how dominant he was. GSP has never used steroids. He's come back and fought dominant people. Not as much controversy as Jon Jones, and that's the reason why I put him ahead of Jones. And I think I've given him plenty of reasons to why I have my top 5 list as the way it is. And yeah, the only thing that might change is that Khabib could get higher and Jones lower. Or if Anderson somehow comes back and whoops old Conor, I might put him a little higher. But for right now, GSP is number 1, and it's probably going to stay that way for a decent amount of time. But yeah, that's my list right there. 5, Daniel Cormier. 4, Khabib. 3, Anderson Silva. 2, Jon Jones. And number 1, George St. Pierre. Thank you so much for listening, guys. I really appreciate it. Subscribe on YouTube and iTunes and any other place you listen to podcasts. And like I said, just thank you so much. I truly am living the dream, even though I know I don't have the biggest following right now. I always wanted to talk about MMA on a platform like this, and just like I said, thank you so much. And I really hope you enjoyed the show. Really hope you can give me some feedback and tell me who your favorite fighters of all time are, and who you put on your GOAT list, as they say. And like I said, thank you so much.